Well, hi, and welcome to an episode of Unstoppable Mindset. Today, we get to introduce to you and get to chat with an executive coach. She says she's an executive performance coach, and she deals with a lot of people from athletes to high performers in a variety of environments. And I'm going to really be interested to hear about all that. But that comes later. Now we got to start by saying hi to Elizabeth, and we really appreciate you being here, and welcome to Unstoppable Mindset.
Thank you so much, Michael. I am so excited to be here.
Well, we're glad you're here. Now, where are you located?
I'm in Virginia.
Oh, so is it hot?
Oh gosh, yes, it's like a light switch flipped and all of a sudden the humidity came. But it was we didn't get that humidity until later, which, you got to take the wins.
Yeah. Well, for people who want to know, this is the summertime for all of us when we're recording this. And right now, here it's 97 degrees in Southern California on the high desert, and it's about 11:34 a.m. So we're going to get to 100 today once again, but we don't have the humidity that you do.
No, but you're actually hotter than we are right now because it's only 90 degrees here, but the humidity is
Yeah.
only 45% humidity.
Wow.
It
You don't
feels
have
like
that much
94
humidity.
outside though. So maybe you guys have it worse right now.
I don't. I've got an air conditioner running, so I'm fine.
Yes.
We'll live with that. Well, I'm really glad you're here. Looking forward to learning all about being an executive performer coach and all that. But why don't we start with the early Elizabeth, you growing up, and tell us about you and where you came from, why you do what you do, or anything else that you want to say.
Yeah, so I got into this by accident. Actually, I have about, I don't know, 10 or 15 years in television and film producing.
Oh,
I know, right? Big twist or big shift to psychology. But long story short, I had a rough childhood, like a lot of people out there. And I was mentally tortured and I wanted to be mentally free. And I ended up being diagnosed with complex PTSD when I was
mm,
26. And there was not a single therapist that I ran into that could help me get transformation. They just wanted me to cope. And I didn't believe in coping. I believe mental freedom was possible. And so, long story short, I got my first master's in positive psychology with a subspecialty in coaching psychology to see if I could fix myself. And that's where I fell in love with neuroscience and neurobiology and neuropsychology, especially. And I ended up getting mental freedom, and then I just was good at it. The rest became history.
without kind of going into a lot of detail, when you say mentally tortured, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my childhood was rough. My brother tried killing me my whole childhood. I didn't know that was like not normal until a few years ago, to be completely honest. And so I was very hyper vigilant. I was very stressed. I was very just always on edge, ready to freak out or feel like I was being attacked. And I just felt so stressed and anxious all the time. And I just wanted healing from it. I also had a handful of experiences of where I was sexually abused by professionals in the medical world. And I just wanted healing and peace to come into my soul and my mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand. Well, that's really kind of sad. Did he ever get over doing that or wanting to do that?
Yes, he did. Thank the Lord, right? He's actually not that type of person anymore, and he and I are working on our relationship. So I forgive him. I'm actually grateful because it's helped me become such a strong and mentally tough person, which has helped me excel in my career.
Yeah. And well, you sound normal, whatever that means.
Right?
I had to say that for a psychologist. I had to say that too.
I want to be weird though. Normal's boring.
I
Respect.
know. Well, you sound like you have your head on straight then.
Yes, I get it. Thank you.
We could do that. So did you grow up in Virginia where you are now, or where are you from originally?
I did grow up in Virginia and then I moved
Ah,
to Atlanta and then Africa and then back to Virginia. That's
oh
kind of
my
my quick.
gosh.
Yeah.
What took you to Africa?
Well, my background is in television producing, and so I had the privilege of doing a wildlife documentary internship. And so I lived on a game reserve for about 40 days, and it was absolutely incredible.
Did you have any up close and personal conversation with lions?
Oh my God, it's funny you say that because I actually almost got attacked by a lion. It's kind of a funny story. I was, I think 24 or 25, and I was on top of the Land Rover filming the lions, and there were cubs, and cubs can be very curious.
Yeah.
And the cub was about to jump on the hood of the Land Rover, and I'm on the roof of the Land Rover. And all of a sudden, in the background, you see mommy just booking it. And so we don't worry about the cub, we worry about mama lion. And at that moment, the ranger screamed at me, "Liz, freeze." And the funny part is, I got the worst Charlie horse in my hip in that moment. And I was like, great, 24, I'm gonna die. Luckily, you carry pepper spray with you when you're, and we wafted it towards them. And so that caused them to shift. But had I lived, it would have been really cool to be like, look, my lion scar just totally trumps your shark bite.
Yeah. Well, but still, who wants to deal with the pain if you don't have to?
Exactly, especially in a second world country.
And why was the lion mad at you? It was the cub who was curious, but that's the way lions are.
Mama lions are very protective. Male lions don't do a lot, but look scary.
Yeah.
They're not.
It's fair. So what other kinds of things did you do while doing television producing and so on?
Oh, I did a range of things. I mean, I've worked with Turner Entertainment, BET. I did a lot of freelance stuff, working on small independent projects. I have done stuff in front of the camera, behind the camera. I really liked line producing at the time, but then it just got very political. And I don't know, I think television shows today are more dark than they've ever been. And I'm okay to not be in it anymore.
Yeah, it gets a little bit tiring to be involved in dark. I must admit, I like a lot of the older television shows, even the ones that are more serious, the Dragnets and Perry Masons and other things of the world. But I like MASH and Happy Days and other things like that. And the Twilight Zone. They're just not as dark at all as a lot of what we see today.
I would agree. And the older stuff actually has a plot. Nowadays, it's just action. And I'm like, this made no sense. And this is so unrealistic.
The exceptions that you can make an excuse for things like we just went to see Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Oh.
And there are inconsistencies, like in one scene, one of the good guys ends up underwater and gets out of some handcuffs. His flashlight dies, but the next scene he's got a flashlight again. And you're going, where did that come from? But that's what makes that kind of movie fun. It's just an action, fun film. Not dark at all in a lot of senses. It's just good entertainment. It was a lot of fun.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's nice to hear that that stuff is coming back out, because for a while there it was just like, oh my.
My niece and I went to see it, and I kept saying to her during and then after the movie, I kept saying, gee, I wish they'd have a little action in this movie. I mean, there was a chase scene every 10th of a second. It was great. It was fun.
Wow.
But you know, we need some of that to get away from a lot of things. And it seems to me that all too often people take life so seriously and they worry about all sorts of things over which they don't have any influence or control, but they still worry about them anyway.
Right. So true.
So how did you and when did you get into coaching?
It was a fluke, to be honest. So I went to graduate school to get my degree in positive psychology with a subspecialty in coaching psychology. And before I even graduated, I was naturally gifted at it, I guess you could say. And my professors started giving me their overflow of clientele. And I started pretty early on, professionally at least. I will say I realized I started doing this when I was 8 years old, not knowing I was doing it because I was the therapist of the family. I kind of, because my dad died when I was 7. So my mom was stuck to raise with this rebellious child herself. And so a lot of times she would confide in me, and students at school would confide in me. But professionally, it was in 2016, 2015, when my professors were giving me their overflow. And it turned out I was just really good at getting people transformation quickly and at that neurological level, which allows for permanency, because us high performers want everything done like, 3 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And get it done now, instant gratification, which doesn't always work either.
No, it doesn't. And at the end of the day, rarely it does. But there's things you can do to suffocate neurons and develop neurons.
Things like,
Well, it kind of depends on the situation. Like, for instance, if you struggle with PTSD, there is a technique that you can do. It's a visualization technique, which is every time you have that that hurtful memory, I guess we could say, reappear in your mind's eye. If you ahead of time are really familiar with that area, you constantly take a step back in your mind's eye, and the less you feed it, the more that neurons will suffocate. In a different situation, like let's say you're trying to create new synaptic nerve connections, this is where neuroplasticity at its finest works. And so you want to change your language, you want to change the way you talk about things, you want to really upgrade your identity, and then it's walking and thinking in that identity. It's a lot like dress for the job you want, but it's thinking, speaking, and seeing that mentality. For instance, I at one point had some health issues, and I didn't want to have the health issues. And I went through this program that helps retrain your brain. And this is when I got really obsessed with neuroscience. And one of the big fundamentals in getting out of sickness, if you will, is not talking about it. Because the more you talk about it, the more you actually strengthen that normalcy. And we have proven in neuroscience that 98 to 75% of all mental and physical illnesses are due to your thoughts and your thinking, which means 2 to 25% is due to your genetics and environment. So there's a lot to say about the power of the mind and how it operates.
Yeah, the mind is a very powerful and complex thing. Yes. Although I also think that if we would stop and think more about what we do in our mind, we could probably learn a whole lot more about ourselves than we tend to do.
Oh my gosh, Michael, I love you. Yes. And, really what you're saying there is people with a prefrontal cortex are amazing, but most people are living in their limbic systems. It's like when you call in for someone and you're like, hey, can I speak to someone with a brain and not just the automated answers you've been told to give me? But, we aren't, the brain develops back to front. And so unfortunately, not a lot of people are taught how to think anymore.
No. And I'm sure there was a lot of that has always gone on, but certainly nowadays, I think that people are much less not really encouraged to think. We're not encouraged to be curious, which is so disappointing.
It really is. I think curiosity is really a skill that can empower you to do so much.
Well, it certainly can. And one of my favorite books is a book by Richard Feynman, the physicist. It's entitled Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, Adventures of a Curious Fellow. And in the first chapter, he talks about being curious. He said his father always encouraged him to be curious. Like they were out in a park or something and there was a bird flying and his father said, why is that bird flying? And just really encouraged. And of course, for a good physicist, a theoretical physicist, but not just physicists, I think for anyone, curiosity is such an important thing. Why things are as they are, how can they possibly be better, or what do I need to do for me and for the world that will make it better? And being curious about stuff is just something we so strongly discourage. I remember once being in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And typically art museums don't really do a lot for me because everything's behind glass. But my wife and I were there and there was this statue up on a pedestal. And she said, it's a really tall pedestal. And I reached up and I could touch the top of the pedestal and the toe of this woman's foot. And this guard shoots over. Don't touch that. You can't touch that. Well, the reality is that how am I going to know anything about it? And he had no sympathy or understanding when in reality, there should be no reason why at least people who can't see sculptures and other things ought not to be able to feel them. They could create procedures in museums and so on to allow for that. But they don't because they operate under different principles like art's made to be seen. Well, it's not just made to be seen, sports fans.
Exactly. Well said.
And we really don't tend to encourage curiosity. My father and my mother did My dad, especially, I think, because my mom didn't think about it as much. I won't say took me for granted in a negative way, not at all. Both
Right.
of them didn't care that I happened to be growing up blind. The doctors told them early on that I should be put away in a home for handicapped children because no blind child could ever go up to
Hmm.
amount to anything. And my parents said nuts to that. And so that never was an issue. They didn't deal with me in a negative way. I can't say that they didn't deal with me in a different way because there are things that you're going to do differently. I learned Braille instead of reading print,
Right.
but my dad especially encouraged curiosity.
Hmm.
And I thought that was great.
Yeah, I think that's great too. I'm someone that was naturally curious. Like I'm a social learner, which
Mm-hmm.
means you deserve to learn at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And your physicist example is perfect because as a psychologist, I'm constantly asking those questions, right? Especially when it comes to language. Like, why is that person using that word out of all the words that they could use? Or what does that word mean? Or what would it look like this? Like I can get to a point where it's like, I don't know if you ever saw Toy Story 5, but I feel like I'm
Yeah.
40 sometimes where I'm like,
Yeah.
what giraffe? It's just like, oh me, I could go into such bunny trails.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. Or there shouldn't be. But unfortunately, all too often, we seem to think that it isn't the right thing to do. Well, it's exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Well, if I were an alien up in space looking down at Earth, I wouldn't want to come here given the way people behave.
Amen.
If they're at all peaceful, they would really encourage curiosity. But
Yes. Yeah. Well, curiosity is huge in empathy too. It's really hard to be empathetic if you can't be curious.
yeah, yeah, it's important to be able to do that.
Yes. I mean, so important. And unfortunately, America has become more self-absorbed and more I-centric, and that is a big downfall in curiosity because it just makes you consumed with yourself and not your community.
Why do you think it's that way? Why is that happening?
It's a great question. I mean, I think a big part is social media. When I lived in South Africa, I will say I really saw the influence of Hollywood at a very different angle.
Mm,
And so I think we are just I mean, well, also Anglo-Saxons. I mean, if you trace it back to all the way to when the English came here, that was one of the reasons why they wanted to come here was that independence. And Anglo-Saxons have always preached it's I, and not really a we. Now it's shifted drastically, I'd argue, from when they first came. It's gotten
yeah,
greater in the I mentality.
yeah. We have forgotten what teamwork is really all about so much.
Yeah, and you really see that in corporations.
I've heard of corporations, large corporations, without mentioning any names, where at the end of the day, when a team does something great, who gets rewarded? Who gets recognized? The team leader, not
Yep.
necessarily the whole team, which is so unfortunate because the team leader is usually made to look good by the rest of the people on the team. And the reality is, it should be a team effort.
Agreed. I totally agree. And I think this is also why so many corporations are struggling to keep competent individuals.
Yeah. They forget what team is all about. And I mean, there's so much truth to the idea that there is no I in team.
It really is. It really is. I mean, who knows what the next 30 years will bring.
Well, the other side of it is that I tend to be pretty optimistic and believe that in the long run, things will work themselves out. And I don't know what it is necessarily going to take to make that happen, but I've
Yeah,
got to believe that we can learn and we can grow and we can get better.
absolutely. And I think you're going to see, I would agree with that. And I think we're going to see those who are more humble and considerate and we focused are going to be the ones that will probably propel forward because people want to feel included. I mean, it's in our wiring to have a community and to love our community and care for our community. We aren't wired to be isolated.
How do we get back to that though? Or how do we move forward to that?
I think humility is going to be the biggest thing, right? But you have to desire that. And you can't force someone to want to get help if they don't want help. But you can love people, even the most toxic people.
Right. But I think humility or adopting a humble attitude is certainly something that makes a lot of sense. That's a very good point. Because again, all too often it's just I and me and not
Yeah.
recognizing the fact that it's us.
Yeah, I mean, because if you think about it, like if you like it or not, we are connected. And it's
Yep.
healthier to be interdependent versus codependent or self-dependent. And like if you decide intentionally or not intentionally to get in a car accident, you impact everyone around you. And
Yeah.
so you have to remember, and that's that power of mindfulness. And mindfulness requires curiosity too, to a degree, to remember that your actions do impact those around you, regardless if you want to believe it or not. Your opinion to that doesn't matter.
Yeah. So what exactly would you say is mindfulness?
Mindfulness is the more I study it, the more I think it's bigger than I'm able to articulate in this one little statement. But mindfulness is being open and observing with curiosity and being judgment free. So it's having a non-judgmental stance with tremendous curiosity. I think you have to have acceptance in it too, personally, meaning that you are open to the sensations and the feelings that you're experiencing without trying to control them.
How do you teach somebody to be more mindful or adopt a more mindfulness attitude?
There's lots of techniques. I mean, I think this is where it really comes to being personalized to the individual. But,
Mm-hmm.
CBT is even one of them, cognitive behavior therapy. And then there's even branches of third wave cognitive behavior therapy that is more explicit on mindfulness. One of the first things I tell people is you've got to grow your self-awareness. And I like to tell people, imagine being a fly on the wall in your own mental mind. Because we have, to your point, right? It's like people aren't always aware. You have to start paying attention to your thoughts. And this kind of freaked me out when I learned it, but you can have 6,000 to 70,000 thoughts a day. And that's a lot of thoughts,
That's
right?
a
And
lot of thoughts.
I know. And
Write
95%.
them all down.
Exactly. And go. But 95% of those thoughts are the same every single day. And
Yeah.
199% can be negative. On average, it's 80%. And so I think you have to learn what your thinking style is. I do have a fun free quiz that will score you in 17 of the most common thinking traps. And you can find that on my website, elizabethlewis.com. But what I found for mindfulness is it's shifting from that fixed mindset of I have to be perfect, or I have to be this way, or I should do this, and getting to know yourself. So many of us don't know who we are as adults.
Mm-hmm.
We've frozen ourselves as who we were as children.
I think you sent me a link to that.
I did.
And we will include that in the notes. So hopefully people will do that and take the quiz. I haven't had a chance yet. It's been pretty hectic, but I do want to go take it. I'm going to be curious to see what it is. See, there we are, back to curiosity again.
Yes, I think, I also think a lot of this is making up your mind and just doing it. I don't know if you've ever had a situation in your life where you're like, you know what, I'm just going to make up my mind and this is what I'm going to do, burn the ships and move forward. That can sometimes create a huge change in your life.
Yeah. I mean, making up your mind, making a decision. And again, I think it's important to do it for the right reason.
Absolutely.
But so you make up your mind to do something and it doesn't necessarily work out just as you thought it would. Even that's okay. I used to say all the time, I'm my own worst critic. Everybody does, right? They say I'm my own worst critic. I don't want to look at this because I'm my own worst critic. What I've learned is I'm my own best teacher, because I read somewhere, no one can teach you anything. You have to teach yourself. They can provide you the opportunity. They can provide you the way, but you have to teach yourself. And I've learned that when I talk about listening to speeches, whenever I give a speech, or listening to podcasts, when I do these, I love to go back and listen because I want to hear me and see how I can make it better. But I've learned that it's not I'm my own worst critic, which is negative. It's I'm my own best teacher, which clearly is positive, and I can learn from even the best podcasts.
Yes.
Or the best of whatever I do, I can learn from that.
Spoken like a true optimist. I love it.
Oh, I've tended to be pretty optimistic in the world. Well, you talk a lot about tough-minded optimists. What is a tough-minded optimist?
A tough-minded optimist is an individual who is usually faith-driven, courageous, they're strong-minded, they're positive, decisive, confident, and intentional. And they value treating people with that unconditional love, that kindness, that compassion, and that encouragement. I think a lot of people forget that you can be a tough individual, right? You can be strong, determined, able to face, while also creating a framework of unconditional love or kindness. A lot of times I'm learning with some of my clients that they think it's one or the other. It's that all or nothing thinking, which is a dangerous trap to fall in. But you can have two opposing truths, if you will, coexist. And it's learning how to rely on your resilience and that optimism that something, really expecting something good to happen in the future is going to be your reward in whatever you're pursuing.
Yeah, I think we oftentimes develop the wrong idea of what tough and tough-mindedness needs
Agreed.
to mean. I think it's resilient, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're single-minded to the point that you can't be open to other things and learn and grow from what you're doing. But you have to start somewhere.
Agreed. And I also don't think it means being aggressive, like
Right.
negatively aggressive. You can be assertive and still loving. And so it's again that it's coming from that intentionality of kindness.
Yeah. And love is something that is all around us and ought to be. Um, I think it's Henry Drummond who wrote the book Love is the Greatest Thing in the World. It's a very short book, but it's a very relevant book I think everyone should read because it talks about the fact that at the root of everything, love is really there.
It really is. You just have to look for it. And unfortunately, not a lot of people have been given love. They know performance love, but they don't know the type of love that humans really require, which is unfortunate, but true.
I talk about dogs a lot and talk about the fact that I do believe what people say that dogs love unconditionally. I don't think there's a
Agreed.
question of that. I think that's in their makeup. They don't trust unconditionally, however. But the difference between dogs and what people have learned is that dogs are more open to developing a trusting relationship than we tend to be. We could learn a lot from dogs in that sense.
Absolutely. And we could take it a little bit further too. Dogs don't have the best memory, obviously. Their prefrontal cortex is only 7% of their brain, whereas humans are 25%. Not that our prefrontal cortex is where our memories are stored. But the one thing about memories and the way our brain works is you can't, your memory is not accurate at the end of the day. And so many people get so locked in their past when they are remembering their memories different every single time they remember them. And so you have to learn how to just let them go. My friend and I have this saying that every time our dogs blink, it's a new day because their memory is so short. And
Yeah,
it's like, that's kind of the attitude you have to take. You have to learn how to forgive and move forward. Not to say you need to enable people who hurt you. I mean, there's boundaries.
right.
But it's really learning how to like let go and move forward and hope for the best. Your past does not define your future.
And that's really the issue. Your past can help you shape your future, but that depends on how you choose to deal with it.
Exactly. And your overall, I would say identity, which is your mindset, your lens, and your language and how you see the world.
Yeah. And I think that all too often, I think you're right. We allow our memories to surface in sometimes some pretty strange ways. I think that we can learn to look at our memories and we can learn to learn from our memories. But again, we don't tend to very easily go into a mode of, at the end of the day, some introspection in our worlds.
Agree. And whenever I have to do like trauma therapy with my clients, I remind them that, how you're going to recall this traumatic memory is 100% based on your self-confidence and your opinion of yourself today and the relations of these people. I mean, you cannot trust your memories. You can take insights and find wisdoms and seeds in it, but you cannot accurately say that this memory is exactly what happened because your brain distorts it.
How can you learn, or can you learn to, and can you help your brain develop to be more accurate in really relaying memories to you?
There's things you can do to improve memory. Like, older adults, it's really important for them to exercise at least 3 times a week. That has been proven to grow the hippocampus. But when it comes to like accurate event memories, there's been a lot of interesting studies. You're not going to remember it effectively. There was this one study, and I can't remember who did it, but they asked 14-year-olds what their life was like. They asked them a series of questions about the quality of their life, the parenting, were they faith-based, were they grown? And then they tracked them down in their 50s and they asked them the same questions, and their answers completely contradicted. The person who said they had a great childhood as an adult said they had a horrible childhood. The person who said I was raised as a Christian as a child said I was not raised as a Christian as an adult. And so your memories are really going to change based off of your perspective of life. So you can't trust them. And really the human brain was designed to not hold on to memories like that, but to be more forward focused. It's almost like a car, right? Like your windshield is the biggest window you can see, where the side mirrors and the back mirror is very small for a reason, because we're supposed to be going forward, not backwards.
Right. Well, I know that when I think about my childhood personally, and I have always, I think, had pretty vivid memories of growing up. I don't view my childhood differently than I used to, but I do think that I sometimes express it differently. Like, I learned Braille when I was in kindergarten in Chicago, and then the next year we moved to California, and I didn't have a Braille teacher or any kind of blindness related kind of teachings until I went into the fourth grade, because we moved to a pretty rural area and there were no teachers around to teach any of those skills. I would say today that I was probably more bored during especially kindergarten, and not necessarily as active as other people in the class, because I couldn't read books out loud or be part of a lot of those activities. But I also know deep down, I wasn't really bored. I listened, right? So I think about that. So I'm sure in some senses I could say I was probably more bored, but I don't recall being bored. But I do recall that, I didn't have the opportunity to participate just like anyone else did until I got to the fourth grade. And that was exciting, because then Braille books started arriving, which helped. But I've always really tried to keep memories and work. And I, as a speaker for the last 22 years, I love to go back and listen even to some of the earlier presentations that I've given, because I think they're also closer to September 11th, having worked in the World Trade Center on that day. And I think that the earlier experiences are closer to it, but I like to go back and listen and make sure that I'm not changing a story unless there's some reason to add value. And I've had a few of those where there was a reason to change part of the story and add some value to it, but the memories are still the same.
And some of those memories kind of more so border on facts, not the overview. But when it comes to like the details of stuff, most of the time you're inaccurate. And depending on, what you've endured, you'll shift things. Memories are, it's just not, we're not supposed to spend that much time in our past.
Right.
It's about bringing your future into your present.
Right. Yeah. And so when I think of the past, it's all about what did I learn that I can use? And one of the things that I have fun doing is I talk to people often about making choices. And one of the speeches that I give is all about making choices, and that your choices are what are going to, in large part, determine the direction you go. And I can trace back a long way to choices that I made that got me to the World Trade Center and got me to where I am today. And I can also then look at those and say, did I make a good choice? Was it a bad choice? And at the end of the day, did it really matter? Because it was still the choice that I made.
It is true, right? Your choices are so important. It's definitely important to be intentional with a lot of choices.
Yeah, and I think it's important to look at, again, yourself at the end of every day and see how you can grow and improve from it. Like I said, we're our own best teachers.
Well, and the brain. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, the brain works best by reflection, discussion, and movement. So one of the most powerful things you can do is intentionally reflect. I agree with that. I always reflect on my day at the end of the day, and I ask myself, where could I have been better? What did I learn, and how was I a champion today? Just to learn, right? I think reflection is so powerful, because we're always learning. We're never going to get life perfect.
Well, the other side of it is not only what could I have done better, but in the things that really went well, anything else I could have done to enhance it? And I don't mind asking myself that question and hopefully sometimes get an answer that says, yeah, here's something else you could have done.
Yeah, or that awareness piece, right? Like I think yesterday I was slightly neurotic and I like took a time out and reflected like, okay, why am I being neurotic? And figured out the answer and moved forward and reoriented and just got back to work.
How do you help teach somebody to be a tough-minded optimist?
That very much depends on where they are and a little bit of their natural psychology. So one of the first things I do when I enroll a new client is I do a needs analysis, and it's where I get them to take 4 assessments, and I study and aggregate their data pretty aggressively to really have a thorough concept of who they are and how their mind thinks, and also the best way for me to teach them since that's so customizable. Yeah. And one of the first things I look at is a psychometric assessment that scores them in 23 psychometrics. And there's actually a personality trait of tough-mindedness that I look at, as well as recognition and trust. And then their ambition scores. And then from there, I kind of have to identify what's most impactful. For instance, if someone comes in and they have a very low score in trust, that tells me they're a pessimist, because trust and optimism are directly connected. Just like low trust and pessimism are directly connected. So first, I have to increase their positive thinking and usually their self-efficacy. You've worked with a lot of high performers. Maybe you've had this experience too, but some of them have very poor interpersonal traits. So they have low self-esteem. They've got low self-confidence. They're not very tough-minded. They don't have the best ability at controlling their emotions and their temperament. And so first, you have to make sure the groundwork is done before we start building that first or second story house. And then once we have the self-efficacy and self-confidence and trust strong, and we have their thinking more positive and their awareness grown, then it's teaching them how not to personalize things. And this is going to be very dependent on that thinking trap assessment. For instance, there is a thinking trap that is called personalization or discounting the positives. I want to know how quickly are they taking things to heart? Because let's be honest, Michael, like everyone has an opinion and they all stink. They all stink, right? Like you don't have to agree with someone just because they say it. And that's why I look at that recognition score, because I've learned high recognition and sometimes even high nurturance can be a result of fear of man, meaning you really see humans have the ability to affirm your worth and you see them bigger than God, or you might struggle codependency or peer pressure or people pleasing. And so we want to like take back power where power was never meant to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's interesting that you say that an optimist is usually a person that tends to be very trusting or has a lot of trust. The other side of that, though, is oftentimes don't people misplace trust, and is that a skill that we need to better learn?
Well, usually people who are misplacing their trust also have really high nurturance. And so they are that borderline codependent person that really is out of touch with their own emotions and wants to see the good in everything. So you have to have boundaries at the end of the day. I mean, I believe respecting people and always giving people the benefit of the doubt, but it's very easy to misplace your trust, especially if you come from trauma. I think not to single out women, but I just have seen it more in women than men. Sometimes when there's been a woman who's had a traumatic past, they overshare, and it's like, stop overly trusting people with your personal life. You have to learn some boundaries and learn that some of getting to know you is earned. You can't just blindly trust people and be foolish. There is a strategy, I guess we could argue, to it.
Yeah, I think that probably makes some sense, that it's all about boundaries. Again, it gets back to, like with the dog, being open to trust. I probably tend to be a little bit more trusting than I should, but I also have learned that while that's the case, I also say, okay, ultimately, I'm going to be open to trusting this individual and I want them to trust me, but I'm going to look at everything that happens between us and so on in order to decide whether I can put my trust in this individual. And I should do that to learn whether I trust them, I'm going to trust them, or do they have some other agenda
Mhm.
And that's a problem.
Exactly. And it's always important to reevaluate your relationships and who you're interacting with, because sometimes you just got to let people go, because it's not worth the energy. It's not worth the enabling them, right? And that's why you have to look at that high nurturance, because those with high nurturance are more prone to enabling, right? There's a difference between forgiving and enabling. If someone keeps hitting you, stop going back to them. You can
Yeah.
forgive them from a distance.
Yeah. And that's the point. You can forgive them, but you can do that from a distance, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, just like
You
if
don't
someone.
have to you don't have to go back and say I forgive you just so they can punch you in the mouth.
Exactly. Like sometimes you have to learn how to love people from afar.
Yeah. But still, love is the important part.
Yeah, yeah. And you have to remember too, and I think we don't do a good job really in the world with this, but I think especially in America, love doesn't take away. Love freely gives, whereas lust takes away. I always kind of chuckle when I get a client, they're like, they're dating someone, and like, I'm so in love. I'm like, it's 3 months. It's 3 months. Come on. You don't really know them that well. That lust phase can last for about 24 months, is what research says.
When my wife and I decided to get married, we met in January of 1982. And in July, I proposed.
Hmm.
We didn't talk a whole lot from January to probably the middle of March, and then we started talking more. She was a
Hmm.
travel agent, and I traveled. I needed to travel to Hawaii. I needed to travel to Hawaii
Yes.
for some sales work that I needed to do in May. So I took my parents along. Karen was a travel agent, so she did our tickets and all that. And I just made the decision kind of on the way over. I wanted to keep in touch with her and called her twice a day from Hawaii.
Oh,
And that was fun. But in July, we proposed. I proposed, and we got married in November. But we both have talked about that a lot since. And what we decided was we really knew from our own points of view what we wanted in a person. She was 33. I was 32. I would love to say I taught her everything, but um, but we were old enough that we approached it from the standpoint of we really knew what we wanted in a person, and it worked out for 40 years. Unfortunately, she passed this past November, but we were married 40 years.
that's amazing. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a big difference. When I was saying that comment, I was more so thinking of
Yeah,
my clients who are serial daters who fall in love very quickly in their mind's eye, right? Every
yeah,
girl or man they get, it's like, I'm in love. And I'm like, we need to maybe get you really clear on what you want.
yeah. And I know some people who are near my age who are and even like 10 years younger, and they just decide they don't want to be alone and they're off dating other people and all that. And
Yeah.
that's fine. I think for me, I'm not sure that there would be a lot of relevance in dating. And besides that, I know my wife is keeping an eye on me. If I misbehave, I'm going to hear about it.
Yes,
So,
yes. Well, and I think really what we're saying without saying it is the intention is so different, right?
yeah,
It sounds like you and your late wife wanted to really create a partnership, whereas these people who are dating because they don't want to be alone, that's really a selfish reason of dating at the
yeah,
end of the day. You really stop and think about it.
yeah, it is. And the reality is, that's going back to you instead of a we.
Exactly.
And maybe sometimes it sort of works, but is it really working? Because if you're doing it just because you don't want to be alone, that's a problem.
It really is. And I'm going to also say it's not going to last, which is
Mm-mm.
probably why the divorce rate is so high now.
Yeah, and it won't. Something is going to happen, or if it lasts, it's going to be tumultuous.
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah, I mean, you were married for quite a bit of time. I mean, it takes selflessness to be in a successful relationship.
Yeah, but it is so much fun.
Yeah, yes, it really is. When you meet the right person and you yourself are healthy, it can be so rewarding.
Yeah, and it works out really well. Well, talking about the whole business of tough-minded optimists and so on again, um, the reality is we've discussed a lot about adversity and things that are a challenge in life. How does a tough-minded optimist deal with adversity as opposed to other people?
That's
Since
a
I gather we're saying that the tough-minded optimist is the way to go.
I think so. I might be
Yeah.
biased. You might be biased too, though. So
Yeah.
maybe Maybe we shouldn't talk about it. Just kidding.
Nah, what the heck? It makes for a good podcast.
Right? Most of the time, pessimists are just so easily defeated by adversity, and they fall into a huge spiral of self-pity and even depression, which is, a big umbrella. But what I've learned is the tough-minded optimist sees adversity as an opportunity to increase their character, their endurance, to grow their faith, their hope, their belief. They see these negative events as minor setbacks to be easily overcome, and view positive events as evidence of further good things to come, right? So it's not about like pursuing the materialism. It's about sharpening their skills, developing their character, developing their endurance more, so that they can have just a better outcome, right? It's like a trial, right? It's like, here's your opportunity to fight like a gladiator. Are you going to win or are you going to lose? Are you going to be tough? Are you going to do it? Or are you going to sit there and complain? It's kind of, am I allowed to cuss? Because I don't like to cuss, but it's kind of like shit or get off the pot, right? This is what you're facing. Let's make the best of it and see it as a challenge, not as a problem.
Yeah. And of course, that gets back to the whole issue of optimism. If you regard everything as a problem, you're never going to grow.
Oh, and you're going to have a crappy life, because let's be real, you are going to go from one problem to one problem to one problem to the next. Life is rarely smooth sailing.
Yeah. So where does that get you? There's nothing wrong with challenges. It's all a question of how we deal with it and how we decide to approach life. I've always regarded life as an adventure. Like I regard the internet as a treasure trove of adventure. It's there's the dark web and all that. I appreciate that. Have no interest in ever accessing it. If I have, I don't know it, and that's fine. But it's such an adventurous process to be able to deal with so much information, rather than I have to have all of this information at my fingertips. I like the adventure.
Yeah. And you know what I love you shared there? This kind of goes back to curiosity. That have to is such a perfectionistic mindset, right? You desire to know all the knowledge versus that growth mindset of curiosity and what's out there. I mean, I don't know how people found information in the olden days. Now I love encyclopedias, but you can just do it so much faster on the internet. And I will spend hours just researching and being curious and just learning, because it's just so fascinating, all the things out there.
Yeah, and there is so much, and it's growing every day. Now, the unfortunate part is that most of the websites that are out there are not very accessible to people who are blind or who have a lot of other disabilities. It's like 98% of all websites, which is what Accessibility helps to eliminate. But that also is an area of growth where I think over time we will recognize that we need to be more inclusive in presenting information so everyone has access to it. But it does tend to be a problem because, again, we deal with the I instead of the us.
I would agree. And in fact, Michael, I didn't even think about that, which I feel horrible, but I'm going to admit it, until I met you. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I need to fix my website so that it's more accessible to everyone, because that was something I had never even, it was like out of sight, out of mind, as much as I don't want to admit that.
Well, I use out of sight, out of mind all the time. I have a whole bunch of boxes of Thin Mints here at the house. I support the Girl Scouts, but a lot of them are in the freezer and a lot of them are up on a shelf. And unless I happen to think about it or happen to touch one of the boxes, out of sight is out of mind, and they will be up there. So I have a stash.
So if I need cookies, I'm going to come to your house.
Come on over. We have plenty of Thin Mints and Venturefuls, and they're available. Like I said, supporting the Girl Scouts is an important thing to do, but they don't get eaten very fast. And so I've worked at keeping a decent weight.
Oh, that's good, because
my excuse.
That's your excuse. You're sticking to it. Like it.
Yeah, that's it. but it's interesting that we really look at things in such interesting ways. And I hope that we'll all grow to be a little bit more open to the we concept, but it is a challenge, and it's a skill that we need to learn. And I love your whole concept of tough-minded optimist, because it's a skill, and it is something that anyone can develop if we work at it.
And it's actually easier to be optimistic than pessimistic, because let's be real, if fear felt good, like we would do it more. But fear, like we're not wired for fear. That's why it feels
Mm-mm.
horrible. Whereas love feels amazing. And so many of the pessimists out there are just bringing so much stress and anxiety onto their beings when they don't have to. Like at some point, you have to learn how to focus on what's in your control and let go of everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. The most important thing, and I think the most important concept that any of us can learn in today's world is don't worry about what you can't control. Focus on what you can, because it'll not drive you crazy to do that.
I would agree. Last year, I went to a neuropsychotherapy training with some elite Ivy League professors, and I was so excited to like nerd out with them because I specialize in neuropsychotherapy. So it was a neuropsychologist conference. I apologize. And I was really excited to hear the like technicality and the jargon. And the biggest takeaway from one of the professors was just like, you have to learn how to control what you can control and let go of everything else. That is
Yeah.
the biggest skill and the biggest freedom. And I was just like, I'm so in agreement to that, but I was really expecting more nerdiness, but I'll take it.
Picky, picky, picky.
Right, right. But that's the thing. Life is so much more simpler
Yeah.
than so many humans want to realize.
Yeah. It is just not that complicated. Now, I understand that it isn't necessarily easy to do. I have groused on this podcast a few times about weather prognosticators. So we had such rain and snow, even close to me. We live in a valley, so we got 2 inches of snow one Saturday afternoon, and that was the biggest snowstorm we had. So the kids didn't even get a snow day. But ski resorts within 30 miles of us that were 5 and 6 and 7,000 feet higher than we were, and they got a lot of snow. Okay, I appreciate that. And it was so much snow that some buildings collapsed and all that. And people were complaining about that. Then we got into May, and all I kept hearing from all the weather people was May gray and June gloom, and it's going to be cloudy. And you know, when are we going to get the sunshine? And I'm sitting there going, you don't want to talk about the rest of what happens when we get all that sunshine, which is like 100+ degrees and wildfires. Now we have 100+ degrees and wildfires, and they're complaining that we're going to have to put up with this heat for so long. You can't ever please them.
No. But you know what? Those people are pessimistic at the end of the day. Look at their focus. It's negative.
Yeah, that's exactly the point, is it's all negative and it isn't doing any good. They have forgotten how to report, and they want to put all this pessimism into it, which is so frustrating.
Yeah.
I hope people who are listening happen to do the weather, and you'll think about doing it differently in the future.
Right.
You
right.
were going to say.
Oh, I don't even remember anymore. I would agree. I stopped watching the news and especially the weather. Now I just like look at the radar, and I still have the same beliefs with the radar as I do with the people, because I mean, they're giving it their best guess. They could verbalize it with optimism by all means. But you know what? I mean, you've been around when the news went off, you know, where it wasn't 24/7.
Right.
And the tone of the news has become more and more negative, and obviously sensationalism sells, but like, I guess I'm still baffled that people are willing to accept it when it's like, we know that this is their tone is negative. It's, you're not going to hear great things.
Once again, we're lowering our standards.
Yeah, very well said. Mic drop.
It's pretty amazing. And it's so unfortunate that it has to be that way. And you're right. I do appreciate that sensationalism sells, but there are ways to present it. And then there are ways that maybe it shouldn't be presented. And I think that the media has an obligation to teach. And it's just unfortunate that they've not learned about how to teach.
Oh, I used to work in the news. It's such a business as it's gone 24/7. And it used to be there where they would teach and they would share objectively and allow you to draw your own conclusions. Now it's like, this is what you have to think. And if you don't think with it, if you don't agree, then you're wrong. You know, we don't have the ability to hold opposing truths anymore like we used to. The lack of respect has decreased, I think.
We've forgotten how to have conversations too.
Mm-hmm. Or like the fact that we could be friends even if we have opposing opinions.
Yeah,
it's possible.
The founder the founder of the National Federation of the Blind, Dr. Jacobus Tembrook, and his wife were from opposite political parties, yet they never divorced. You can disagree. And, there were things that my wife and I disagreed about. And I know of other people who have had long running marriages, and they can disagree. And that's part of what really makes a neat marriage, is that you can disagree, you can disagree, and it's okay. It gets back to what teamwork and teaming is all about.
Well, and I think too, one of the reasons I believe that so many people more of my age are struggling with staying married or staying in committed relationships is because a lot of us weren't taught how to regulate our emotions or how to suck it up butterfly, right?
Yeah.
We were allowed to just quit when the going got hard. And to think that you're going to fully agree with someone 100% of the time is just foolishness. I mean, your perspective is different than everyone else's. So to think you'll agree all the time is silly. But I think if we could teach kids how to regulate their emotions and maybe not coddle them so much, we might have some different outcomes.
Yeah. And the other part about it is if you agreed all the time, it'd be pretty boring.
Right? It'd be
Where's
so
the challenge?
Boring. Right? I would agree.
So it's okay to differ a little.
I would agree, and I mean, also, most of what we talk about is opinions. Even science is a theory, and for whatever, for theory A, theory B contradicts it.
Yeah. And then when something comes along and we really can prove it, what a joy.
Right? Exactly.
So what do you do when you're not being a high performance coach?
Oh, I love learning. Learning is something that I find so enjoyable. I love teaching and I love exercising. My faith is really important to me. My puppy is really important to me. He's not a puppy, but he's a puppy to me.
What kind?
He's a Shih Tzu mixed with a poodle. It's called a Shih Poo.
A Shih Poo, yeah.
They are apparently popular now, but he's about 13. He's the apple of my life. Cutie.
I have a 7-year-old black lab guide dog and a 13-and-a-half-year-old cat who runs the house. Just ask her.
Yes, I bet. It's funny. I went to church this last Sunday, and there was this little short moment about cats and dogs, and cats believe they are God, and dogs see their owner as God.
Yeah.
I was like, that's so accurate.
It is absolutely so true. And that's okay. My cat loves to get petted while she eats. She's developed this, and she'll yell at me until I come and pet her while she's eating.
Yes.
And most of the time it's okay, but she's also developed a little bit of a knack to try to get me to come in when I'm eating. And I have started to push back a little bit and say, Stitch, I'm eating. I'll be there when I'm done.
Good for you.
Yeah. We got it. But, if she really wants me that badly, then she can come out and tell me rather than yelling from the bedroom.
So my dog is like a husky in the sense of he's very talkative like that too. And he has to have the last word, and he and I will do a little bit of what it sounds like you and your cat do. And I'm like, my dog's name's Moo Moo. And I'm like, Moo Moo, just chill, buddy. You can be patient.
Alamo the lab is absolutely wonderful and tends to just put up with anything and doesn't complain a bit. I have yet to hear him bark, and we've been together since February of 2018. But he loves attention, and he thinks he's a lap dog. If you sit on the floor, he's going to be in your lap, and he's not going to be subtle about it.
Oh yeah. I had to buy a chair, an office chair that is for a 6-foot, 300-pound plus man, so that we could both sit together, because he didn't like the fact that he couldn't sit with me. Now, Shih Tzus are technically truly lap dogs, so I'm like, okay, you are living up to your duties. I won't get too mad at you. But he ends up taking over the whole chair, and I just get like just a little bit of it.
We adopted a breeder dog from Guide Dogs for the Blind when we lived up in the Bay Area, and so the breeder dogs are the ones who create all the puppies for guide dogs, and so we decided we wanted to be breeder keepers, and we got introduced to Fantasia early in 2006. My wife has always been in a wheelchair, and we knew Fantasia was the dog because when Fantasia came in the room. They were introducing dogs to us one at a time, and there were 4 dogs, but they thought Fantasia was going to be the one because she came right over and was up in Karen's lap in the wheelchair. Had
Oh,
no fear of a power wheelchair whatsoever. And so she was always part of the family as well, and slept on the bed. Karen let her sleep on the bed, and I had no say in the matter. What we did realize, and I finally got Karen to recognize, is Fantasia took her half out of the middle. So maybe there was enough room for the 2 of us.
Yeah. It's funny. I joke with my fiance that like we should just go get an Alaskan king, or no, what is it? Alaskan king, right? It's that huge. It's huge. I think it's like 12 by 10 or 10. I don't know. It's a ridiculously large mattress because our dogs, just even though it's a Shih Tzu and a Chihuahua, just somehow take up the whole bed.
Yeah. It's a fun world. Nothing like having animals around, is there?
They're amazing, right? I wish they lived longer.
No. Do you have any other Do you have other family besides a dog?
No, not. I mean, I have my mom that I'm very close to, and I have some good friends, but I don't have any kids. I just got my puppy.
Well, you cope.
I do not want kids. God bless those who want kids. I've been a caretaker since I was 8 years old, and it's what I do for a living. I've never wanted to have kids, so I'm good with it. You know, I started nannying when I was 13 too. So I feel like I've gone through so many of the age groups. I'm good.
Well, we didn't have kids either. We figured we'd just spoil nieces and nephews because at the end of the day, we could kick them out.
Exactly. That's my thought process. My brother has 2 kids, 2 girls, and I love getting to know them. But I am my youngest niece just turned 1, and when she gets, temperamental or hangry, it's like, Mom, she's yours. Okay, have a great one. I'm going to go now.
Yeah. Yeah. If you don't come and get them, I'm going to sell them to the gypsies. Yeah.
There you go.
Well, I want to thank you for being here. This has absolutely been a lot of fun, and I'm glad that we had a chance to do this and would love to do more of it. If you want to do it in the future, we can figure it out. But if people want to reach out to you, maybe explore becoming a client and so on, how do they do that?
You can reach out to me at elizabethlewis.com. You can email me at elizabeth@elizabethlewis.com, and it's LOUIS. I'm that weirdo. Yes, I got to call myself weird since you call me normal. On the podcast, you can reach out that way. You can also follow my LinkedIn account and reach out to me on that as well.
Well, cool. Well, I want to thank you, Elizabeth, for being here and for spending so much time with us. I love the insights, and it was absolutely every bit as fun as I hoped it would be. And I hope you listening out there feel the same way. I hope you enjoyed it. Reach out to Elizabeth. I know she'd love to hear from you. And we will be putting in the notes the link to the free quiz that you mentioned, so people can take that and explore what that brings.
Yeah, thank you. And Michael, it has been such a delight. I would love to come back. This has been so enjoyable. And I love where the conversation went. Like it's I feel like it's rare these days to have such stimulating conversations because everyone's so I focused.
Yeah, well, it has definitely been fun. Well, I want to thank you, and thanks for listening out there. Please give us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening to us. We appreciate that, and leave your comments. We love them as well. I would like to personally get your comments. Please feel free to email me at michaelhi, michaelhi at accessibe, accessibe.com, or go to our podcast page, www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. And Michael Hingson is MichaelHingson. And by the way, Elizabeth, and for anyone who's listening, we were talking about website accessibility. If you go to accessibe.com, there's a place where you can actually go do an audit of your website, and it will tell you what's accessible about it and what's not accessible about it. And there are a lot of options. You can choose to use Accessibe, which is pretty inexpensive for fixing a lot of the issues. Depending on how complicated the site is, there may be other things to do, but you can get a free audit of the site. And for any of you, go to accessibe.com and go to Access Scan and learn about web accessibility and see how accessible your own site is. So again, Elizabeth, I want to thank you for being here. This has been absolutely a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you.